The top 10 players not otherwise holding a PGA Tour card will be awarded one at the end of this season with the race to Dubai, which concludes next month in Dubai. And here is the current top 10 list of those guys who would potentially be a factor on the PGA Tour next season, including the recent winner at Wentworth, Ryan Fox, and another former Ryder Cup Europe winner, Thorbjorn Olesen. Well, to dig in on this a little bit more, we're going to welcome in the BBC's golf correspondent, Iain Carter. Iain, thanks for joining us. This is going to be an interesting scenario when this plays out with the top 10 guys who have the option then of going to the PGA Tour. There's been some criticism from guys like, say, Lee Westwood, Ian Poulter, that it somehow dilutes the DP World Tour by giving away their 10 best players. But is this really just creating a pipeline the players have always wanted to face better quality competition on a more lucrative tour?
Yeah, I think it's, Eamon, been brought in because the tour is there for its members, and what's the best thing that they can do for their members? It's to provide the opportunities to play in the biggest and best tournaments around the world. And as we know, all the aces sit with the PGA Tour these days, perhaps more so than ever before. So it is a natural sort of byproduct, if you like, of the strategic alliance. And it does offer that motive for those players, should they want to go to America. I noticed that Bob McIntyre, for example, is really weighing up very hard whether or not he would go and settle in America and play the PGA Tour. Is that what he really wants? Is that the lifestyle that he wants? I suspect that ultimately he will probably decide that that is the best thing for him. But equally, he's saying, well, I played in a winning Ryder Cup team and that might be enough for me. And I think that then points you in the direction of where that feeling of unease about this actually sits. We saw how motivated Europe were against the United States. There is that chip on the European shoulder, and that feeling that the European Tour is now officially a feeder system into the PGA Tour, well, that doesn't sit comfortably with a lot of people around the European golf scene and a lot of fans.
Now, Iain, speaking of that feeling of unease, you wrote on the BBC's website that there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the future of professional golf, with everything going around being very clouded between the PGA Tour's potential framework agreement with the Saudis, if that is going to come to fruition, if potential private equity might be at play. If I'm a golf fan, how do you distill this down and explain this to me in a way that I can understand in terms of where we're at when we think about the future of pro golf?
Well, it's just so difficult, isn't it? I mean, I tried to do that in that piece. I'm not sure how successful it was, because the situation is just so complex, so shrouded in uncertainty, and so shrouded in secrecy as well. And who knows how this is going to pan out. But I think that sense of euphoria that I think certainly on this side of the pond that was felt in the wake of the Ryder Cup, that has dissipated a little bit by the knowledge that we just don't know what the shape of men's professional golf is going to be going forward. What are the implications of the framework agreement actually coming to fruition? Is that going to be possible? Is the added investment that the PGA Tour is seeking, is that to replace the framework agreement with the PIF, or is that to supplement it? We just don't know. And it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out in the coming months. But there seems to be a clock ticking. The mood music seems to be a little pessimistic about whether or not the deal can be done with Saudi Arabia. And there are those who will feel that that potentially is a good thing if the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour can go in a different direction away from Saudi Arabia. But we still don't know. What we do know is that there needs to be that cash injection if they are going to be rival entities to LIV, because we know that the pockets that finance LIV are as deep as they can be.
Isn't there a knock-on effect in all of this for the Ryder Cup, particularly the qualification process in Europe? And when you put it in the context of the top 10 European guys potentially moving on to the PGA Tour each year, they've currently got the World Points List and the European Points List. And the World Points List is designed to accommodate the top guys who don't play that much in Europe, predominantly on the PGA Tour. If that's heavily oversubscribed, with guys who aren't competing as often in Europe as they used to, well, then there's going to be an imbalance there in terms of making up the teams in the future. Do you think that's something that's a pressing concern for Ryder Cup Europe?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good point that you've made there, Eamon, because you've described it exactly right. You will have too many Europeans going for too few spots on the world list. And so an imbalance to that qualifying system. Now, it may well be that whoever takes over for Beth Page, or whether Luke Donald remains in position as captain, will, I would imagine, have that at the top of their agenda. But equally, if you suddenly turn around and say, well, we need to address that point and then reduce the number of qualifying berths from the tournaments that are played over here in Europe, well, that diminishes the value of those tournaments and, again, just plays into that narrative that the DP World Tour is nothing more than a feeder to the PGA Tour. And, again, Europe is a very proud entity in terms of men's professional golf, and they don't want that diminished. European fans don't want that. We saw how much that European Ryder Cup victory was enjoyed, and that's symptomatic of how we feel and have traditionally felt about the European Tour. So anything that diminishes that is not going to be welcome, I don't think, with European golf fans.
Ian, we heard news earlier this week that the OWGR has officially declined to offer world ranking points to LIV golfers. Bryson DeChambeau said that this is something that's just par for the course in terms of what they've experienced so far this year. What was your reaction to that news?
Well, I think I was slightly surprised because, again, the mood music was a little more encouraging around that, especially when you saw the pairings for the recent Alfred Dunhill Links Championship, when His Excellency was paired with Peter Dawson, the chairman of OWGR, and that seemed to suggest that maybe they were on very good terms, and who knows, they might have found a way to provide ranking points for LIV. But I think the explanation that was given by OWGR, the fact that it was technical rather than political, that's what they insisted was the case. You could see that it all made perfect sense. I was always very uncomfortable that something that has a team element to the individual competition could be compromised in terms of the overall impact of what a player does and the motive for what that player does, lagging a putt rather than going for it, as was the case with Ortiz in Orlando with Brooks Koepka, although that's been denied subsequently by Ortiz. I've always felt that was a potential issue, as is the access to LIV, the fact that players can be in the relegation zone on LIV, but they can preserve their status on LIV if they're a team captain. You know, these are all areas that are so fundamentally different to the way that all the other tours that are part of the OWGR are concerned. You know, they're fundamental difficulties. And I think, you know, people have made the point that, you know, if you were setting up a new entity, then surely the best thing to do if you want world ranking points is to go to the governing body and say, what is it that we have to do? What criteria do we have to satisfy? And make that one of their founding principles. Well, that certainly didn't happen in the case of LIV, and it's come back to bite them. But the key thing from all of this is access to the majors. And I just wonder now what the majors are going to do and what they're going to say in terms of trying to find mechanisms to bring players into their fields who surely have to be considered among the very best in the world, because it's not in the majors' interest not to have those players in their fields.
Last week, Bryson DeChambeau suggested that the top 12 LIV guys, fully a quarter of the entire LIV roster, ought to be automatically exempted into majors. Martin Slumbers at the R&A has been the most conciliatory in his public remarks towards LIV, certainly in the last year. Do you see a scenario, Ian, where the Open Championship or the other majors do carve out exemptions for LIV guys?
I think it's inevitable, Eamon, because, as I say, they need to have the best players in the world there. And, you know, whatever you think of Taylor Gooch, for example, you have to acknowledge that he is a player of a standing that is way higher than is reflected in the OWGR, and in all probability should be a player who is competing for the biggest titles in the game. I think that Seth Waugh has been pretty conciliatory as well from the PGA of America's standpoint, and I sense a softening. I sensed a softening in Mike Wann's attitude when we were at the US Open last year compared with 12 months earlier. So I do think that they will move in that direction. I think that it's a very glib thing for Bryson DeChambeau to say, right, just make it the top 12. I mean, what equations have gone into that? But maybe mini order of merits on LIV could be one way to go. That was something that was suggested on a podcast I was on earlier this week by Eddie Pepperell, the DP World Tour player who's a member of the tournament committee on the DP World Tour. So that could be something that they will look at. But I do think that they need to put mechanisms in place.
And Iain, I just have to ask you about the passing of Ivor Robson, the voice of the Open. You've covered many an Open championship. In all your recollections of Ivor, what does his contribution to golf mean to you?
Well, I think he was quintessential Open championship, right down to the gentle Scottish burr of his Borders accent, the way that he delivered things, the calmness in which he did the job, the famed ability to be able to do that job all day long. And remember, the Open Championship isn't like the other majors your side of the pond, the Masters accepted. It's a 1T start. So he started at 6:30 in the morning, finished at 4:30 in the afternoon without a break, without even taking a comfort break. And that became a kind of legendary sideshow. But you can never recall a moment of a foot being put wrong. We've seen from so many of the players with their expressions of condolences in the wake of this sad news, just how much he meant to them, his calming process and presence on the first tee when, as we know, it's a very stomach-churning moment to kick off an Open championship. And he did everything with real class. And I think that is the thing that we'll remember most about Ivor Robson. Not many people got to know him very well. He was a very quiet, private man. He had a very public role, and then he just took himself away and would just melt into the background at the many tournaments that he started on the DP World Tour as well as the Ryder Cup. I don't think he was ever particularly comfortable at the Ryder Cup. It was all a little bit raucous for Ivor at those occasions, but he was just simply perfect for that role at the Open Championship. And I think it's absolutely right that he is being remembered so fondly this week.
And as we know, Americans tend to think that Brits with the accent in golf are all eccentric characters. Ivor was certainly one of those. I suppose they think the same of you as well. Iain, thanks for spending a few moments with us this morning.
Cheers. Thank you.